Good afternoon and welcome to a special edition of the Volley Pod. How are you today, Todd?
I am fired up, Davis. We have a special guest, so it's an exciting day for the
Absolutely.
Volley Pod. We have David Durand with us, and David is a sports performance and psychology coach out of New Orleans. David, welcome to the Volley Pod.
Yeah, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
And you have a new book, and that's going to be the subject of our episode. Tell us a little bit about it. It is B.E.T On It, Bet on It, a psychological approach to coaching Gen Z and beyond. Where did this come from? Give us a little background.
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, so a couple years ago, I started getting more into kind of the mental performance, helping athletes, coaches, teams on the psychological side rather than the kind of physical side. So my background and training is in clinical as well as sports and performance psychology, but also strength and conditioning. So I've worked across a couple different sports and player development and helping athletes get bigger, faster, stronger. And then I started to shift more into blending in the psychology of it. And I was watching a lot of high school volleyball. I married into a big, volleyball family, so I've been learning a lot about it the past number of years. And my wife's a coach, and sister-in-laws are coaches, and I was working with some teams, and so I was around it a lot. And watching a lot of high school volleyball games, like a lot of high school sports, I was seeing that it wasn't necessarily the team that was winning was the most talented per se, but it was usually the team that could handle stress a little bit better or regulate their emotions a little bit better or not, falter with different kind of social dynamics within the team. They could stay more cohesive. And so I started to think about how, the nervous system of these players is really important. If you have a nervous system that is regulated, meaning that you have more control over your thoughts, your emotions, your behaviors, the social aspects, then it's usually better for your individual performance, but also the team. And so the idea was to, with the teams I was starting to work with, high school volleyball teams, to put together a little bit of a workshop, some camps where I could help them regulate their nervous systems through their breath, their eyes, and their touch. And so that's BET. And so, the high schoolers at the time were saying bet all the time, right? Like, oh, are you going there, this week? Oh, bet. So they're always saying bet. So I was like, okay, I want something kind of, relatable, fun for them, but also has some meaning and kind of simple for them to, start using some tools to help their brains and their bodies so they can perform better and enjoy volleyball more.
Nice. Very cool. Well, I, read your book and loved it, took a bunch of notes. And I love the way you started in the intro. The quote is, if we use how we were taught yesterday to teach our children today, we are not preparing them well for tomorrow. And that was, I think, Dr. Don Siegel, you had his quote to start the book. But that idea that mental training is so important, like you said, and it's something that I know, Davis, you've probably done a better job than I have in your coaching because you were more of a psych guy, and I'm a kind of crazy skills guy, David. So this is great for me. A good way for me to start the book is like, hey, learn some more about it, buddy. If you're going to be a coach, you got to do it. So,
what I was going to say, so I have been trying to do some of this, like I've been trying to take a psychological approach, right, in my coaching for a long time, but you're so expert on it that I think you make it very relatable and very succinct, right? I think it's got a bunch of great stuff, and I couldn't agree more that it's a difference maker in competition for sure.
Well, and the simplicity of the language and the framework that you have, David, tell us a little bit about, speaking of frameworks, the 3 nervous system modes, because that was something that now all of a sudden I'm watching my players, I'm like, that mode, I get it. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So we want to start in connection mode. This is where we want to live. Connection mode is a mode where we're connected to ourselves, we're connected to our surroundings, we're connected to what we're doing. And so our nervous system, it acts as this highway of information between our brains and our bodies. There's information that's flowing on this highway all the time. And our nervous system has a gas pedal and it also has a brake pedal, because in times in life and in competition, we need to be able to be more alert. We need to go, go, go. We need to have energy. We need to get things done. And then we also need to slow down. We need to be able to hit the brakes, rest, recover, sleep, digest, all these things. And so our nervous system has these 2 pedals. When we're in connection mode, we have access to both pedals. We're regulated. We are in a regulated state where we're in control, and we can hit the gas when we need to energize. We can hit the brake when we need to calm down. The issue is life and competition, they throw us out of connection mode just naturally. And we enter into two other modes where it's more of just kind of survival. And I think all coaches can relate to this. So, the number one thing I hear from coaches is like, man, I just see my team and they start playing defensively after a mistake, and I can see them get caught in their heads, and then they're reacting instead of, being proactive, and it just kind of compounds on itself. And then they end up shutting down and they don't listen to me, and they roll their eyes and this and that. And so it's like, those are the modes. Connection mode is where we want to be, but inevitably we'll get thrown into these other two modes. And these other two modes, the first one is action mode. That's when you're stuck on the gas pedal. So think of an athlete, maybe that's a little bit more anxious or high energy on edge, and they can't really control their kind of impulses. Maybe they're rushing their serve instead of taking their time and kind of breathing and taking a second. They're kind of nodding their head as they're listening to you and fidgeting a little bit, but they're not actually taking in information and implementing it. This is action mode, where we're go, go, go and stuck on the gas. And I think it's a good analogy because, if you have your foot on the gas and it's stuck, like, what's going to eventually happen? Either you'll run out of gas or you'll end up crashing. And that's what happens to our nervous system. Athletes nowadays are so stuck in action mode, go, 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 all the things to do, busy schedule, scrolling social media, a lot of games, a lot of practices, all these expectations, that they end up going into the mode called shutdown. And so our nervous system, if it doesn't take breaks, if it doesn't regulate and get into connection mode, it will go from action into shutdown mode. And then this is where they're lethargic, fatigued, exhausted, dramatic, rolling their eyes, not really caring, going through the motions. And so we see these modes play out. And, the big question then is, how do we help our athletes go from action mode or shutdown mode back into, connection mode? And that's the book provides the framework and then some tools to also help do that.
Yeah, that example of action of the player going back to serve, that's a great one. And that's another wonderful quality about the book is you have so many real practical examples that I, even a non-sight guy like me go, okay, well, I don't know a lot about the brain science, but I know when the kid goes back to serve in a crucial situation and all of a sudden their tempo's off and they're stepping before they even toss the ball. Right. And I'm watching going, this is not going to end well. The ball's going under the net or something. How can this player who's played so much volleyball hit a serve under the net? And that's just why, is because they get in that action mode and they have this high anxiety. And I haven't taught them ways. I hadn't read your book and learned ways to help them regulate their emotions to get in that connection mode. So let's move on. Davis, what do you have next?
Well, the next idea that I thought was super powerful from the book, and there's many, but this idea of social stress and how powerfully it impacts adolescents, right? Like teenagers, basically, and that they're going to slip into that shutdown or action mode a lot of times because of the impacts of social stress. So did you just want to touch on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, we're social creatures just by nature. And going back to the, volleyball serving example, even that, it's, the reality of life and competition is that, energy in social environments will get a grip on you. Other people and their facial expressions, what they say, and the noise level and the pressure of the game on the line, all of this will influence our brains and our bodies. And so, the framework is to understand, but also have tools to be able to control, because if we don't control our energy, then the energy around us is going to control us. And that's really what we see kind of happening there. But we also see this in particular with adolescents because they are biologically wired to be more on edge, meaning, they're looking over their shoulder more because they've had around the age of 10, 12, 13 years old, this rise in self-consciousness. So now they're feeling a little bit more intensely insecure. Their social world is expanding. They're separating from mom and dad and care so much about what other people think about them, in particular their peers. And so their nervous system is already in the state of dysregulation, so to speak, because they're on edge, they're insecure, they're trying to stand on their own 2 feet, but they're not really sure who they are. And so, this is a feature of adolescence and not a flaw. But so many times in coaching, we see this as a flaw because it's like, we just wish they would be, more secure, just more, capable sometimes. But I think that's also the beauty of sports and coaching, is for us to be able to help guide them into that state of stability. And obviously that takes time and easier said than done. But I think when we look at nervous system regulation, it really opens up, and we can see that the role of sports, yes, so they can hit a serve, fantastic. But it's also to help them discover who they are, to have this sense of identity, to develop real world skills that they can transfer to other things throughout their lives. So as much as we want them to ace a serve, really the things that are leading up to, the things of regulating their energy and emotions, connecting with their teammates, listening to their coach, getting feedback, making adjustments, all of these are life, real world skills that they're going to carry forward with them. And so, yes, their nervous system is in a state of dysregulation, and they're a bit more on edge than, humans in other phases of life. At the same time, this feature of adolescence gives a lot of opportunities to be able to be coached and guided effectively and appropriately.
Yeah. And what happens, I know you talk about this a little bit too, what happens when you take that and you mix in the whole social media part?
Right. Yeah. And so, this social media really exacerbates a lot of the dysregulation of the nervous system. For instance, right, they're wired to look at their peers. We're wired to compare ourselves socially. However, if we're, scrolling, which on average, teenagers right now are scrolling social media platforms 4 to 5 hours per day, not just, screen usage, but just looking at social media platforms. So, that's thousands, hundreds, probably thousands of images and videos they're seeing, which are, highly edited and filtered and the highlights of everything. So if you're this insecure adolescent who's struggling with their own identity and, finding your place in the world, and all you're looking at are all these images of how beautiful and attractive and awesome and amazing other things are and other people are, and you're living this internal, reality that's a little bit more broken, and you're having trouble controlling your energy and you're missing serves, then there's going to be a huge gap between appearances and reality. And that gap is going to be really, really churn the dysregulation of the nervous system. And so we even see, social media and its impact on the cognitive, emotional, and social aspects of adolescent development. So let's get even specific with volleyball performance. And I was actually, texting Davis, back and forth about some of this stuff relating to this, and shared an article with him that was specifically looking at social media's impact on sports performance. And the variable there that's really important is mental fatigue. So if I'm an athlete and I'm, scrolling social media, that's going to set up a whole host of unrealistic expectations. Unrealistic expectations is going to put more pressure on me and then worsen my performance. So there's that aspect. But there's this other aspect of, okay, now I'm having more mental fatigue because I'm scrolling all the time. I'm overstimulating myself. So then I'm going to go from, action mode and then into shutdown mode. And so they're seeing in the research, even sports performance, athletes that scroll social media prior to training for 30 minutes is impacting, their performance negatively in how they play the game and what they're able to do. So it's not just, disrupting sleep and biological aspects of development. It's not just hurting, the emotional and self-image stuff, but it's also directly impacting the sports performance. And I think all these aspects are important for coaches to know. But it's just interesting that it's even showing, performance, negative performance outcomes as well as the other ones.
Such a good point. And how often as coaches do we go, oh, they made so many mental mistakes, right? It's like, and I think a lot of this is super relevant to where we can help them, at least be the best version of themselves, to where they're going to make as many mental mistakes as they normally would in practice, right? Maybe not more. And, if we can find their correct, zone to be in terms of their nervous system, right? And then also, I thought this was a great take. Just a great connection from the book was this idea of coaching for connection. When we create this safe and supportive environment, the athletes can flourish. And I know that a lot of times I fall into yelling at them or being hypercritical, and it's just going to push them away, basically, right? Is that something you wanted to mention to everyone?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we start to see, athletes and the nervous systems behind these athletes, then the coaching world really opens up to us, because coaching a lot of times isn't really about information. We may think it is, but it's really not. It's more so creating the conditions for them to be able to make the changes that we want and that they want as well. And so what I mean by that is, maybe it's okay, hitter goes up, the middle block is covering, so they need to drop their thumb, and the cutting it, across the line, like that was the open space. Well, we know that they know what to do, but they're having trouble actually doing it on the court, actually transferring that into, the real game application. When, they make a mistake, they're probably the first ones to kind of start beating themselves up. So their nervous system is probably already on edge or a little bit dysregulated. And then if we start to yell, right, that's a social influence that's going to further dysregulate their nervous system. When they're dysregulated, it's hard enough, they can't really hold eye contact or receive information because they're not in the connection mode, they're not in social engagement. So we're kind of wasting a lot of our efforts. So we're trying to, quote unquote, help them. But the way in which we go about that typically will push them further away. And so now, I think about it as like, I don't know if y'all have ever, this is a bizarre example, but I don't know if y'all have ever tried to like catch a minnow or a fish with like your bare hands, on like a bank of a river or like lake or something, right? But if you're like trying to do that, right, you're kind of following it, trying to figure out like how it swims and everything. But what happens if you go in too quickly, right? If you go in too quickly and try and catch that minnow, what typically happens is you don't end up getting it, and then the water gets really muddy. And so now you're frustrated, right, because you didn't get it, but you're also frustrated because now you have to wait for that kind of mud to settle and then try and find it again and try again, right? I think it's an interesting metaphor for coaching in the sense that we go in too quickly because as coaches, we just want to help and want to do things. We want them to know things. So we kind of trust that impulse. But in doing that, we don't get the effect we want. And then we end up making the water really muddy, and we get really frustrated and then have to wait a while in order to try again. Whereas I think if we, to go back to the metaphor, if you just wait and like watch the pattern of like how that minnow is swimming and kind of figure out where it's going next and kind of what it looks like, then you're able to be more precise in your approach. And I think that's what coaching is really about, is like really understanding the patterns of your players, like what is happening beneath the surface, the state of the nervous system. So that way, when you do approach, you're more effective and precise rather than kind of barging in, doing it your way without fully understanding.
You've been watching me. So before we get into it, because obviously I need some this framework that you have is great for someone like me, because it's not only the simplicity is wonderful, but the effectiveness is great. Before we get into it, we're gonna talk a little bit, Davis, about your favorite video platform.
Balltime.com is an awesome resource for coaches, and it can really enhance the volleyball intelligence of the athletes by coupling the video with their stats, and they keep adding new stuff that gives the players, just like you mentioned, more information.
Yep, they just released the in-app recording. So now it's just you open up Ball Time, you film your match, and it's already in there. You don't have to film it and then upload it into the app anymore. So it's they keep getting better and better.
They keep making it
They're working with Huddle now, and so that's going to be, I know they have big plans there. So it's exciting, Davis.
It's an exciting time, and it's just a hugely beneficial resource for coaches and for players. So check it out, www.balltime.com. And we're back to David here.
All right. Well, we know that the Tod and Davis method of seeing your players who are in one of those less desirable modes, whether it be action or shutdown, getting tense with them isn't the way to do it. So you have a simple system, the B.E.T system, the B for breath. So let's start with that. I think we've all heard coaches say this, take a deep breath and the positive effects, but you get even a little further into specifically how to breathe. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And, the breath and eyes and touch, these are bidirectional pathways, meaning they influence the state of our body and our stress levels, but, our stress levels and the state of our body also influence them. And so it's the easiest way to really kind of get control over our nervous system. And the breath, right? We breathe 20,000 times a day. So it's the lowest hanging fruit. So if we want to be able to just access our nervous system or state of brain and body so quickly, this is the way to do it. And this kind of coaching cliche, right, of just like taking a deep breath. I think the intention behind that is correct, right? We want to slow down and take a deep breath in order to calm down. However, there's nuance in that, because when coaches say that, they usually, all right, let's take a deep breath. And then everybody breathes really big. They're puffing out their chest like a superhero. Their shoulders go up. But this is actually an incorrect way to breathe. This is dysfunctional breathing. And so when you say a deep breath, in order to really compose your nervous system and calm you down, we want to concentrate on low and slow. And so low meaning really breathing by pulling your diaphragm down to fill up your lungs, which is, our primary breathing muscles are our diaphragm muscles, as well as the muscles around our rib cage, and that help our diaphragm. And so the diaphragm, we'll pull it down and we expand our belly like a balloon. And when we breathe slow, right, then we're really starting to activate that kind of brake of the nervous system. In particular, when we exhale, that's when we access that brake. When we inhale, that's when we access that gas pedal. So if we want to calm down our nervous system, we take a low breath, right, expanding our bellies as we inhale and constricting them as we exhale. And we want to exhale longer than we inhale. So say I inhale for 4 seconds and I exhale for 8 seconds. That's going to have a calming effect of my nervous system. So taking a deep breath is really taking a low and slow breath in order to calm down and be composed.
Such a good point. And it's a little tweak, but it makes a huge difference in how it affects your body, right? So I think that was an awesome take on it. So I guess the next one, you had a bunch of other great takes on the breath. I just wanted to put that out there. So, people should read the book and hear more, but let's go on to the eyes, right? So what was one of the key findings that you wanted to share with everyone about the eyes?
Absolutely. So our eyes, right, our vision is so intimately tied with our autonomic nervous system, which is the main part of our nervous system with when we think of stress or like fight or flight response. And so when we get stressed or our nervous system kind of gets dysregulated and we get in that fight or flight mode, which happens so much, right, in playing volleyball and with the players and athletes and with us coaches, if we're being honest, right, what happens is that it restricts our vision. So we get tunnel vision. Everybody knows this. And so when we get really stressed, our peripheral vision fades away. Our vision aperture becomes constricted and we really can only see kind of what's in front of us. And so, this is good to know, one, to kind of assess your players and helps you see what mode they're in, because you're asking them to see spots on the floor, but if their nervous system is dysregulated, they may be like actually, biologically unable to kind of see some of those openings. So helping them regulate actually opens up the parameters of their vision and affords them more opportunities in the performance environment. And so when we're, trying to help players, it's okay, well, how can I impact their vision? I can change the state of their nervous system. We can do things with our eyes to change that state. And so, something as simple that we can do right now as people are hearing this is something called panoramic vision or landscape vision. So if we just sit still for a second and we focus our eyes in front of us, whether it's a spot on the wall or, the landscape or beyond us, just fixate your eyes on something kind of centrally in front of you. And as your gaze is fixed in front of you, just notice the top part of your vision, the bottom part of your vision, and the sides as far as you can, the top, the bottom, and the sides. And as you do that, what's happening in your nervous system is as you're broadening your vision and the visual aperture, you're also calming down your nervous system. So it has this calmative effect. So just as our body and brain state can impact our vision, what we do with our vision can impact our body and brain. So we're just regulating our nervous system there. So that way now we're a little bit more calm and composed and connected. And then we're also able to see more. And so, for instance, a volleyball player, right, if it's like an outside hitter that maybe is kind of getting blocked a couple times or gets, tools to block a couple times as things are going well, but if they're kind of getting caught up in the game and they're not really seeing other open spaces on the floor, just being able to help them regulate and then be able to point out like, hey, are you seeing any openings on the court? Like where you think is going to be the next opening? And if they're not able to answer that, being able to show them and help them, guide them into the right area of the spots on the floor. So that way they're concentrating on the open spaces and seeing opportunities rather than, always looking at the blockers or, the people playing defense and playing a little bit more with avoidance rather than approach.
I like it. I like the idea of space.
Awesome
I'm getting, Davis knows it. I'm a big space invader. That's one of my new little deep dives in the whole idea of space and time and how we do that. So this is cool. Yeah. The one other point I want, if you could kind of explain a little bit regarding the eyes, is this idea of eye contact. Because on one hand, you say this eye contact is great because it's great that we can get in connection mode with other people with good eye contact, but that it's not that simple, because sometimes the eye contact doesn't work like that. Can you explain that a little bit? Because that was a new, something that I'd never thought about before, never heard.
Absolutely. And when we evolved as a species, and even just mammals, animals evolving into mammals 200 million years ago, it's the fact that we developed this connection mode, which is a social engagement system. We're able, instead of just seeing everything else as predators and being on the defense all the time, we are able to create relationships with people like us and do something together and form bonds. And so that's really when this kind of shared attention, we are able to, we developed, the sclera around our eyes so you could differentiate the pupils from the rest of the eye so you can actually see where other people are looking. And this is really important, our kind of evolutionary story, but then to, fast forward to right now and how this connects is that this is how we can really connect with people, is looking them in the eye and kind of sharing these human experiences. And there's just something so human about that. When we share attention, it actually, we have these phrases, oh, we're on the same wavelength. But there's actual real data and research behind that of when we're sharing attention, when we're looking each other in the eyes and we're working on something together, we're becoming more socially connected, and our brain waves do and can sync up. And so when we say we're on the same wavelength, that can actually be a literal reality if we're doing something together and sharing attention. So, the science behind just eye contact is so powerful, especially when humans, it helps bring us into a deeper sense of this connection mode and social engagement, helps us to be together and do something greater than either of us could do alone. And so that's a beautiful thing. However, eye contact is appropriate when we're in connection mode, but if our nervous system is dysregulated, it can actually be threatening. And so, just think about that when you make a mistake or something, how much the players are actually looking in the eyes when you're giving feedback or something. It's probably because they're dysregulated, not because they don't want to get better, or they don't care. It's just in that moment, they're probably overwhelmed, overstimulated, and they're finding it difficult to engage socially. And so when we're demanding people to look us in the eye, that's going to backfire if they're in a dysregulated state. And even if they appease us and our demands and they look us in the eyes, they're probably there, but they're not really there. They're not really listening or taking anything in. So I think the better way is to understand how powerful eye contact is, but it needs to be put in its appropriate context of, nervous systems that are regulated are able to enter into that. And the ones that are dysregulated probably just need some help, being able to shift into connection mode before they can engage in that more fully.
That's a cool distinction. Thanks for explaining that. I appreciate it.
Oh, that's awesome. And let's go into touch now. You mentioned a bunch of practical things that we can do with touch, which we know, I think we kind of, subconsciously know as coaches that touch brings us together, right? But there's a bunch of science on this and a bunch of practical applications that we can use. Did you want to go over a couple of those things?
Yeah, sure thing. And so when we're thinking of regulating our nervous system, this is a self-regulation, which is, me trying to regulate my own nervous system. But as social creatures, there's also co-regulation. We can also help regulate each other. So I'll go with self-regulation to begin with. For me as a player, if I'm going back to serve, the volleyball, just being mindful of my touch is such a tool to use to ground myself. So that way I'm not caught up in maybe mistakes of the past or the pressure of the situation or the what ifs of the future, but I'm just fully present to that moment. So even just being able to, take an extra second, doing my breath, I'm fixating my eyes, I'm focused, I'm in the moment, but even just to notice how the ball feels in my hand and the texture of it.
Interesting.
Even that itself, that kind of mindful sensing.
Yeah, I'm going to ask Davis. Now, do you have are you a valve guy, Davis?
I used to be a valve guy. Yeah.
So what did you do with the valve?
I put the valve on the bottom.
You put the valve on the bottom.
I wanted it to fall
okay.
off.
You know what we're talking about here, David, right?
Yes.
So the valve with the valve. So that's a routine that I always have, is I always have to find it. And I put my finger on it before I lift up my toss. And so my finger goes on the valve. So, but that's always part of it, of touching the valve, which is a different kind of texture than the ball, right? So
right.
I have that routine that's kind of been built in when I was a young player, but I never really realized it. And when I was reading the book, I'm like, hey, I do this naturally.
That's so cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And so, yeah, just to even talk about the science behind that too, of our motor system and, our tactile way of kind of getting to know the world around us is so linked to our emotions and our emotion processing and regulation. So, the parts of our brain of touch, the somatosensory cortex, is, intimately connected to the area that processes emotion, even the amygdala and different, emotional centers of the brain. And so while we're becoming mindful of our touch in that moment, that can act as a really calming and connecting experience to be able to decrease maybe the stress that we might feel and to regulate our nervous system in a connection mode. But then also to be more efficient in our movements. Again, I know y'all talk about having that external focus of attention, getting the attention, you're mindful in that moment, but the attention is outside of yourself on how that ball feels and, kind of the motion of that. But even take that a step further and provide a science of proprioception and, right, this awareness of how our body moves throughout space. Proprioception and that sensing is a superpower when it comes to athletics. And so we have these special receptors on our hands and the bottom of our feet that are texture receptors. They're called 2-point discrimination. So it's how we can tell the texture of objects. And so when you're activating that, you're not only helping yourself emotionally be more grounded, but you're also improving the awareness of how your body moves throughout space. And an athlete that's more aware of their body's movement and mindful of that is an athlete that can be more effective in their movements, that can serve better, that can, be able to be more consistent in what they do. So there's, multi levels of things going on there of how touch scientifically can help that athlete emotionally, physically, but also skillfully.
That's awesome. I really love all this stuff, and it's just so powerful, the connection between the body, the mind, performance, all of it. And one of the ones that I thought may, I guess, run counter to sort of maybe more traditional advice, but I think it makes complete sense, is this idea of the sideline soother, right? Everyone's like, okay, get focused, hey, get your mind back on the game and eyes over here, or at least, that's kind of what I experienced growing up. But this idea of the sideline soother can be really powerful for getting them to not only perform better, but just have a better experience. Like, do you want to touch on what that sideline soother is?
Yeah, absolutely. It can be anything. And it's, again, going to this idea of like self-regulation. So how can we use our touch to be able to kind of ground us and regulate our emotions? That way we're most present to the performance environment, what's going on. And so even just having something, personalized for the players that they like to, hold in their hand, or something they can touch, just being aware of how their feet feel in their shoes while they're on the bench can be a good, experience for them to just be grounded before they go, back into the game. Or, something like a placard or a note card, or just something they can like hold, or like, some sort of memento or something that they can hold in their hands, or even just kind of tapping their shoes before, something that's tactile and that can help them, like fidget spinners, right? That was a big thing. And so even fidget spinners, like things like that, are little objects that you're tactiling, interacting with, that help kind of ground your emotions, let you know you're here, you're present, and then kind of help you engage with your surroundings. So I think even just letting players, have certain tools like that they can use, and it's personalized, rather than, you have to, you being in the game looks this certain way, or it has to be this certain way. Just kind of giving them autonomy and empowering them to regulate themselves and however they see fit.
That's really cool. Yeah.
I just love it's just that the system seems so simple and so easy for us to just take into practice when we look at this, the idea of breath, the idea of eyes, the idea of this touch, and a couple simple things we can just even practice, even do it during practice a little bit, like a water breaks or something like that, just to get them used to the language, used to some of the habits. So when you do them in a game, they're not new, right?
Absolutely. And yeah, even just throughout practice, like having breathing breaks. And, I think you can spend just a little bit of time looking at the research behind, how we breathe and how that directly impacts, our performance, but also our ability to learn. So if we're talking about regulating nervous systems and how then we're able to learn more effectively. And as coaches, we're trying to put less effort instead of more effort. The frustration comes when you're putting in all this effort and nothing's coming back, right? Or I'm doing this all for them and they don't even seem to care. It's like, okay, well then how can we be, just going back to that metaphor of, trying to catch that minnow, how can we be more effective in our approach and our strategies? And this is, one way to do it is just having breathing breaks throughout practice where you're able to regulate together as a team, whether that's, an optimal kind of resonance there is 6 seconds inhale, 6 seconds exhale. Just being able to do that for a minute or two, in between things that you're working on in practice helps you get a little bit more return on your investment. Or, just being able to, take time, slow things down and kind of, direct their vision or even ask them, right? Instead of demanding or telling them, just like, hey, after they make a mistake, what did you see there? Then you're asking them to educate you on kind of what's going on. Be like, I don't know, I didn't even see anything. It's like, okay, well, it seemed like you were struggling with this, but this area was open. Why do you think you're struggling getting the ball there? Like, why do you think you're having trouble opening up there? Well, I just feel really stuck on the line. I'm not getting my shoulders around the ball, and just letting them coach themselves and kind of eliciting out of them. Then you're putting less effort and energy yourself, but you're getting more in return. I think a lot of times, again, it just goes back to being a little bit more patient, observing and trying to understand, because the reality is they're typically not unwilling or unmotivated. They just might be like biologically unable. And so if we can help them become regulated, then we're opening up these degrees of freedom, which allows for them to step into their potential.
David, you're teaching an old guy new tricks. I love it. The book is B.E.T On It, A Psychological Approach to Coaching Gen Z and Beyond by David Durand. It will be in the show notes. David, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with the Volley Pod audience today. I know that I learned a bunch from the book, and hopefully our listeners will go out and buy a copy because it's a wonderful resource to become a better coach.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Thank you, David.
Thank y'all so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate it.
Thanks, David. Take care.
Thanks so much, David. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Y'all too.